Claude will now introduce our Time for All Ages.
Good morning, everyone. Today, we're sharing a Time for All Ages, a story, as noted, for all ages, from the young to the young at heart, and everywhere in between. Our special guest speaker, Dan MacKay, is going to share a story from his childhood, and I'd like us to all think of how we may or may not relate. Please join us, Dan MacKay.
Yep, you can share it.
Oh, there we go.
And then if Paul can remove the spotlight on that.
Yeah. My name's Dan MacKay, he, him. I'll have a bit more to introduce of self-introduction later. So this is a story from when I was about this old. My dad was the plumber in our town, and we lived near the ocean, and there were summer cottages where people would come from all over North America and some from Europe for the summer. Just lived there during the summer. When they weren't there, the electricity and the water was shut off and the cottages were all locked up. But of course they wanted the cottages ready to live in when they got there. So this is what my dad did. My dad and I did. Where in the spring we got the cottages ready. And so, believe it or not, when I was little, I was his helper. I was my dad's helper doing plumbing and heating. No, it is not.
No, we turned it
No.
on.
It's off now. So this is my dad and me and his truck. So 4 of the homes, 4 of them, of the probably hundreds of summer homes where my dad and I got these ready, were owned by a group of women in a place with a funny name called Coffinscroft. Coffinscroft. Have you heard of it? No? Coffinscroft. Coffinscroft. And it's because a family of Coffins, their last name was Coffins, moved there 400 years ago and still live there. So I'll talk about this a little bit later, but last summer, Paul and I went to Coffinscroft and interviewed some of the Coffins. Anyway, my parents got to be friends with these women. And in my family, I don't know about your family, but friends of your parents are also called auntie and uncle. Aunt, uncle, and so I had a whole bunch of extra women aunts, all who lived in this place. I had Aunt Marion and Aunt Maria, and especially I had Aunt Mamie and Aunt Tessa. This is Mamie and Tessa here. Hang on, back up here. And there. Mamie and Tessa, you always used their names together because they were always together. Lived together in one of the houses. And they and the other aunts were all really smart people. They were writers and publishers and researchers and artists and photographers, and to me they were just the smartest and funnest people I'd ever met. And I spent a lot of time with them. And Mamie and Tessa taught me about all kinds of literature and art. Aunt Marion taught me about Mi'kmaq cultures and legends, because she had just in the 1960s, she was working on a book of Mi'kmaq legends, and so I know the Mi'kmaq legends really well because that's what I learned. That's how I learned to read. I didn't have a Dick and Jane book. I had a book of Mi'kmaq legends. They're sometimes called Glooskap stories. As someone who knows them quite well, that's not what I would call them. But if you don't know the Mi'kmaq legends stories, look them up. They are the most, they're just beautiful, beautiful stories about all kinds of things in the world. Aunt Maria taught me about North American, colonial settler folklore and stories, and there's lots of those too, hundreds of those stories, which we also don't hear, although you probably have heard of like Paul Bunyan. So that's just one little sliver of hundreds of these stories. So Aunt Maria Leach was her name, had written this book. And so it's a collection of North American, of settler legends. Or some people call them tall tales. In the book, there's one little story that's just like this big on one page. There's a story about a man who helps a ghost who is in trouble. And then the ghost is really happy about that. And for the rest of his life, the ghost helps the man. The ghost follows the man around and helps him in a variety of places. So after the book was published, there was a rock band in the 1960s. They were trying to figure out a name. And they were flipping through my Aunt Maria's book. Flip, 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 flip. And they flipped to this one story. And they said, hey, that's a great name. That's the name of the story is a great name for a band, the name of the story, but the ghost is called the Grateful Dead, and the band is the Grateful Dead. My Aunt Maria named the Grateful Dead. Then we moved away, and I didn't see them for a long time, but I was planning a trip to New York City, and my mom suggested that I visit Aunt Mamie and Tessa, and of course I wanted to, and I got their address from my mom. She said, they live in this place called Greenwich Village. And I said, oh. And she said, their address is 14 Christopher Street, which is, anyway, the penny dropped for me as an adult. It's like, oh. They live in the middle of the most concentrated gay district in the world. And my mom said, yeah, they've lived together there since 1929. They had rented the same apartment since 1929. So I went there. And this is maybe a picture from the 1930s when they were there. So my boyfriend at the time went to visit them. When we stood on the roof of 14 Christopher Street, because it was up, you can just walk out onto the roof. And Aunt Mamie pointed out to where famous people like Truman Capote and Gertrude Stein and Allen Ginsberg and William Burroughs, lived there, and Gertrude Stein stayed there, and we all went for lunch. That was a pretty special experience. And that was all a long time ago. And for a long time, until last summer, I wondered if I had dreamed some of these memories or made them up or somehow exaggerated them. And it started to bother me more and more. It's like, were these real memories or did I kind of, So I got in the car and I planned 3 or 4 days in Coffinscroft. And I went down there and I interviewed all of the oldest people who remembered my Aunt Mamie and my Aunt Tessa, and they confirmed all of those stories, and they told me a few new stories. And actually, I was talking to one other person, and my Aunt Mamie and Tessa had just gotten back from Rome. They had spent 10 years in Rome as the researchers for the Grolier Encyclopedia, and I thought, well, again, did I make that up? And I talked to this wonderful woman named Joan Zappoli, who some of you might know. And I said, because she lived there, and I said, does that story make any sense? She said, well, I lived with Mamie and Tessa in the wall in Rome for 3 of those years. So yeah, I think it probably happened.
She's a member of our congregation.
Yeah. And they told a whole bunch more stories. So from these aunties, I learned a whole bunch about books and art and storytelling and the value of preserving stories, And I also learned that my parents thought it was important to have all kinds of friends, and the more different from you your friends are, the better life you have.
You can keep it on there now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It takes a whole village to raise our children.
It takes a whole village to raise one child.
Takes a whole village to raise one child.
Everyone will share the love.
Everyone will share the love.
Everyone will share the joy.
Everyone
Great story. And the interesting connections with the Grateful Dead and Joan Zappoli, and that was great. Oh yes, yes, they're still around. They haven't died yet. So now let's move deeper into this sacred space. We bring our hearts into this community and we open them up to each other, so that those of us who carry pain might be comforted by the presence of a loving community, so that those of us who are happy and well might share our joy and see it multiply in others, and so that those of us who carry complex truths might find a welcoming space to process and make meaning of all that life brings. This, our communal well, holds all of our stories. It is the place we come to be held and loved. The water is a reminder of our connection to each other, to all life. So if you have a story, a joy, a sorrow, a complex truth on your heart that needs to be spoken in community, or if you want to come up in silence, we invite you to come forward and drop a stone into our well of community, to mark your story and to remind you that you are not alone. Please keep your comments brief, a couple of phrases, and you'll have to come around here to the microphone because we can't move it at all well. No. And for those of you on Zoom, you can chat a comment you can type a comment into the chat. So if
No, we don't, we're not doing that.
You have to turn share screen off, I guess, on the computer.
Yeah, but no one else is talking, so we're keeping it on.
Okay.
They can see on Zoom. They can see.
Yes, prayers for my son as he continues to look for a place to live in this market.
can you come up, Irene?
Since the 18th, I've been allowed to see John because there was COVID on his unit, so I had not seen him for 19 days. So he seems to be, some days he's really all right, and some days he's not. But it's nice to see him.
That was a message from Irene, who can't come up to the microphone, but she has been able to see John since the 18th, and she hadn't seen him for 19 days before that, because they had COVID on the floor where he is. And some days he's good and some days he isn't, but it's good to be able to see him, finally. Anyone else want to?
My name's Bob Frederickson. I'm just very glad to see
Bob,
Dan here.
Can
Over
you
here.
just come over here?
I just wanted to say how happy I am to see Dan here. Dan has been.
You don't have to be that close.
Where do I go?
You can just stand here and, yeah, stand that way.
This is good.
You don't have to talk.
Oh,
to
I don't
each
talk
other,
into it.
speak
Okay.
back.
Anyway, just Dan has been a godsend to many people in this town for the last. I've known Dan for what, 40 years or something along those lines, and he has been an absolute godsend. His story will and our experiences here with the UU Church are really important. I just wanted to say thanks for being here, Dan. Enjoy it.
Very well.
I will add one more stone for all the joys, the sorrows, and the complex truths that remain in the silent sanctuaries of our hearts. The ones that words cannot express, the ones that are still forming. We see you, we love you, we are here for you. I have to tell you that I just picked a stone random out of the collection, but it's one that has written on it, connection. Now I invite you to listen. Jessica presents our reflective song, When I Am Frightened. When I am frightened, will you reassure me? When I'm uncertain, will you hold my hand? Will you be strong for me? Sing to me quietly. Will you share some of your stories with me? If you will show me compassion, then I may learn to care as you do. Then I may learn to care. When I am angry, will you still embrace me? When I am thoughtless, will you understand? Will you believe in me? Stand by me willingly? Will you share some of your questions with me? If you will show me acceptance, then I may learn to give as you do. Then I may learn to give. When I am troubled, will you listen to me? When I am lonely, will you be my friend? Will you be there for me? Comfort me tenderly. Will you share some of your feelings with me? If you will show me commitment, then I may learn to love as you do. Then I may learn to love. Now let us turn to our main event. We're very pleased to have our guest, Daniel MacKay, here today. So, Dan, I'll ask you to come back.
As we say in the 12-step meetings, I'm still down. So today, what are we celebrating today? We're celebrating this thing, this memo on October 24th, 1972. That is tomorrow, 50 years ago, tomorrow. Reverend Gillis reported that there's been a request for the use of her building for lectures, discussions, etc. by a gay social group moved by someone, and that the group be permitted to use the church building without payment Wednesday nights. Now, as far as I know, this has not been revoked, so you know, you may be seeing us on Wednesday nights. And I would have loved to have heard Fred's sermon that next Sunday. Many of you are too young to remember this, but it's important to remember why this was important. At a time when every other organized religion barely considered us queers human, the Unitarian Universalist Church of Halifax welcomed us through these doors. That's pretty frickin' cool. So here's a little timeline, just to kind of center you in time here. Stonewall, the big event in New York that kind of started. I'm still getting an echo here, so let me fuss at this for just 1 second. Sound off. Yeah. Stonewall was 1969. 1970, 1971, we know that the local Halifax Gay Alliance for Equality was kind of gelling up and people were talking. Up until a year ago, I didn't know how that worked, and it was driving me crazy as a kind of amateur historian. And so I put on my publisher hat and got some funding and hired a researcher, and she talked to everybody who was still alive who was there and made up a 6,000-word story about how the community gelled up. That story is available, and the interviews are all available as archival material. I boiled it down to 600 words, and I made it into a little brochure that's out on the table, so help yourself to those. That's how the community gelled up in 1972, early 1972. We had a registered society in Halifax called the Gay Alliance for Equality. It was meeting in homes. And then this thing happened on October 24th, 1972. Now, I have to stop and say that I didn't do any of the research for the church. I do not take credit for this. All the credit goes to someone who prefers to not be acknowledged, so I will apologize in advance. So for putting you on the spot, I don't know if he's on. It's Doug. So Doug found this thing while he was looking through something else. I said, well, that's really. Oh no, we were having a conversation, and I said, this thing happened, and I wonder how it happened. And Doug's like, yeah, I wonder. And 6 months later, he came and he said, look, here's that. Here's where it happened. Here's when it happened. He had actually pulled this out of the archives, and I said, how did you find that? He said, I just went through the archives. He just went through years worth of archives and found it in the minutes and clipped it out. So Doug has a long history of activism in the province, which if you just come to church with him, you might not know. But there's a page for him in the Halifax Rainbow Encyclopedia, which documents fairly well his activism. One of the funnest things that he did was many of you actually will remember this. In the 1990s, there was this rabidly homophobic, Christian, Bible-thumping, hateful woman named Roseanne Stokes in West Milton, Pictou. And she was a member of Parliament. She had been elected. And we, the queer community, rallied in a bunch of different ways against this. And this is Doug's contribution. Thank you for not skoking. Which he did the design, and he had the buttons printed. He says he only printed a dozen or so buttons, but everybody remembers them. So either they had a huge impact, well, I know they had a huge impact, or there were more than a dozen, but I don't know. And in fact, later on that year, Waves stole the design and the theme for our cover. That's April 1997. Exactly the same thing. And in fact, later in 1997, she was defeated and has not been in politics again.
Dan.
Yay. Yes.
Remember the mic.
Oh yeah. Just move it over closer to me. There we go.
But when you
There we go.
don't turn away from it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Pardon me. Yes. So this is about me. I was born in the very southern tippy tip of Nova Scotia. Coffin's Croft is right down there, as well as Barrington Passage and so forth. As a teen, I moved to Bridgewater, halfway to Halifax, and at the end of my teens, I moved all the rest of the way to Halifax. The thing that I'm most proud of in my career is building this, starting in the late 1980s, building this thing called the internet. If you've heard of the internet, or if you've ever used it, I'm delighted. I think it's worked out pretty well, but I was on the team that built the internet in Canada, and that was a very, very exciting time. Theologically, this is where I am, and for people who can't read it, this is a big chart of branches of Christianity. But as far as I'm concerned, it's branches of all kinds of theology. This is obviously some kind of confirmation class, and the person at the whiteboard is saying, at the very end of thousands of different branches of this thing, he says, so this is where our movement came along and finally got the Bible right. And someone in the audience is saying, Jesus is so lucky to have us. Okay, and you can see that fits in pretty well with the Unitarian Universalist. It's a little bit of satire. I was raised ecumenical. We all sort of thought our mom was Catholic. I was baptized Anglican. We visited all kinds of churches in town. We visited all the churches in town. I find almost any kind of spiritual experience totally fulfilling. So I spent a lot of time in the mosque, the synagogue, with the Catholics, the Protestants, the Quakers, the Wiccans, and here, and I'll talk about that more. And a year ago, I'd been corresponding with a cousin that I'd never talked to in the old country, and he sent me some information, and that was a little mysterious to me, and I said, well, what about this? What about this list of Jewish-sounding names that you're sending me? And the cousin wrote back and said, well, your grandmother was Jewish, your mother was Jewish, and you and your brothers are Jewish. Everyone knows that. I was, oy vey! Wouldn't have killed anyone to tell us. So I've been wearing a rainbow kippah for a very, very long time before, which was kind of cultural appropriation, and now it's not. I like it for a whole bunch of reasons.
Other scars.
Yeah. So I go to lots of places, including this quite wonderful place. You've probably never heard of this spiritual path called Brahma Kumaris, but I've been there a couple times. I like it for a bunch of reasons, but mostly I love this symbol. So they have, so what is the symbol? You can see it's a tree, branches, and you can see that there's a branch for every spiritual path. Okay, that's not bad imagery to start with. There's branches for Christianity, there's branches for Taoism, there's branches for Judaism, blah, blah, blah. In the imagery, this is a evergreen tree, also not such bad imagery. We are needles on the evergreen tree. So far, so good. And the sap of the tree is the divine. The tree's branches carry the divine to us and fill us with the divine. How's that for frickin' imagery? Like that it can't beat that. Okay, we're gonna ignore the very top symbol here, which we can talk about later, but it is a nuclear explosion. And they believe in reincarnation, so as soon as this meat bag dies, your soul is poured right into a new fresh meat bag, and baby, that is. Anyway, and they also have, after every service, chai and ginger cookies. Nothing else, just chai tea and ginger cookies, which is yummy. Anyway, for my day job, I got, away from my day job, I got publishing in history and archives, and this says a layout of Waves magazine, which I've done for many decades, in the 1980s. This is the 1988 Pride March, one which lots of people remember. And then people started giving me stuff because I was publishing and looked like I was storing stuff. So I had to create I created a thing like the Wikipedia that is a LGBT history encyclopedia for Halifax. As of yesterday, it has 2,000 articles in it, give or take, and 660,000 words. So I'm going to take you, including the historical encyclopedia, including a history of spiritual paths in Halifax. So I'm going to take you on a very brief burn through those. This is going to be, we're going to go quicker. So almost immediately after Gallo was formed in the early 1970s, a Roman Catholic group called Sparrow was formed. In mid-80s, there was a group called Kinship for the Seventh-day Adventists. There's Affirm United for the United Church. I don't think there is a queer group for the Mormons, but I don't think there was ever one in Halifax. I have no evidence of it. The United Church has always been reasonably positive, so they started having this designation called Affirming, and they got that in the 2000s. Bedford, St. John's United, Shelburne, etc., etc. And there more and more are coming. Affirming, the quote that I really like is from Rabbi Eisenberg at the Shar, who was the rabbi at the Shar Shalom synagogue for a while. Being open is allowing people to come to the dance. Being affirming is inviting people to the dance. Really nice quote from him. That kind of wisdom you expect from a rabbi. Also starting in 1980, we had LGBT Alcoholics Anonymous group called Live and Let Live, which met for 40 years, every Monday night, I think, for 40 years. They met in a variety of places. Live and Let Live had their annual conference in August for many years, for probably 20 years. I don't have it. Probably for about 20 years, right here in this building. And so we have a banner, this beautiful banner that exactly fits in this space here. It's a flag. It's a flag with the conference's logo on it that we had made. And it fits exactly here. There's pin marks there and there where it can be pinned up. And then people sign it at the end of the conference. People who attended sign it. And so it's all marked up now, right? It's got hundreds of signatures on it because every year you attend, you add your name again to it. So it's a huge mess now, but it's a stylized sailboat, and you can imagine that if you put it here, like it's designed to go here, right in this space, in this building. Then it has the bird and the clouds over it, which that works very well. So we've been here for a lot. This only one of hundreds of LGBT events that have been held in this building. Okay, this building is home for us. In the 1980s and the late 1880s, in the late 1980s and 1990s, we were busy with a lot of things. We were very busy dying of HIV/AIDS, and at the time, your diagnosis was a death sentence, and you had a few weeks or months to make your peace. So here's a couple AIDS quilt panels from a couple of the very first, very well-known community members who passed away, Graham Ellis, Frank Morton. The second name, Frank Morton, got to be named for a AIDS hospice, which was created in 1988. And I've looked at the notes, and this is, if your history muse ever visits you and demands that you do some history research work, give me a call. I've got lots of work for you. One of them is, how did this happen? Because we know that in most churches, decisions and projects move with the speed of cold molasses uphill. And from the minutes of this, I can see that these guys started talking about this in March or April, and they had this house bought in November. How did that happen? And also, looking at the minutes, the very first minutes, they had printed up a letterhead, and the first minutes, top of the letterhead said, Catholics assembled to respond to AIDS, and the name of the organization was CARIS, which is a nice name. And then the next meeting, the next month, you have the minutes there, and it's the same letterhead, but someone has X'd out Catholics with their hand and written in church member. And so we know exactly when the organization said, okay, it's not just Catholics. So that was pretty cool. In the 1980s, we had this enormous influx of Shambhalans into the city. They came very LGBT positive, and on and off there have been mostly men's groups meeting. And in 1991, we had our own church called, it was originally just called Safe Harbor, and then later on we folded into the Metropolitan Community Church framework. It's from a United Church background. If you were, why does it keep doing that? United Church tradition, he would have been very, very much at home there. They created a food bank for people with serious diseases, starting with HIV/AIDS, called Manna for Health. They met, Safe Harbor met in many locations. Veith House in North End was in the end, right here for many, many years. And this piano has a particular memory for me because our pianist was a drag queen called Miss Vicky, who some of you might have seen perform. And she would play this piano, but only in E flat major. Can you tell me why?
I don't know.
She had fingernails that long, and she could only touch the black keys. So everything was in E flat major, and so it got to be a little tedious. And so we figured out that so before every hymn, someone would just come up here and crank the transpose button, and she would play an E flat major, and it would come out in whatever key was appropriate for that. This photo here, I think, is in our space called in Bloomfield Center. For a while, they had Bloomfield Center all chopped up. Each classroom was chopped up into, was allocated to a different group, and you'd rent it for not very much money, a couple $100 a month, and you had that whole room rented. And so we were meeting there for a while, but we met here for a long time, and that was a very cozy place. And Safe Harbor Church, I don't know if this is a useful cautionary tale, but Safe Harbor Church always depended on the heroics of its minister. Right? It depended on a minister who was paid $15 an hour for half-time work or something, but actually worked hard professionally for 60 hours a week. And she died, unfortunately. And the church just went downhill from there because it depended on her heroics to run the whole thing. And people squabbled and squabbled and squabbled and squabbled. And we eventually had, in succession, 2 Metropolitan Community Church ministers come in from away and try to fix things and try to get the thing back. And both of them wrote letters and said, this congregation is unsalvageable. Which is a little sad when your minister tells you you're unsalvageable. But anyway, 2 people happen to. I'm friends with both of them still. We had a fun LGBT wedding chapel for a while. The second wackiest spiritual experience you'll ever have in Halifax meets here, or used to, here on Sunday nights, called the Spiritual Science Fellowship. Who here have been? Hands. No?
I remember them being
Yeah. It's equal parts mid-19th century old-fashioned Christianity and the occult. So you sing a few good old-time hymns, and then the runes come out, and you can get your fortune told from the runes, or from a plumb bob, or from your palm. I didn't see a Ouija board, but it would not be out of place. Anyway, it's an interesting experience. If they're not meeting here, it's too bad, because there were lots of people. It would be full. This room would be full. And it was fun, because it was good. You know, everybody loves belting out those old-time hymns. And all along, throughout all this time, have been the Quakers. The Quakers didn't make a big deal out of it. Integrity, the Anglican Church has cranked up, 15 years ago in really a big way. And more recently, 2020, we now have 2 practicing kind of LGBT-focused worship events. One's a very focused Anglican service. It's high Anglican. It's ordinary high Anglican, except run by queer folk. Hosted out of St. Mark's in the North End, and very shortly after that, First Baptist Church over on Oxford created Queer Spirit Church, and that's on the on the evening of the second Wednesday of the month, I think. We've had many, many interfaith services at Pride festivals, which could always use more planning. And if your event planning muse calls you, please step up, because the last one was enthusiastically planned but very poorly promoted. And so we had all these wonderful people ready to deliver great spiritual messages and almost no audience. So that's during Pride. It's called the interfaith service. And what's that?
What's happened with Shabbat, like in terms of, like, sometimes they participate in the parade, and I know I've been to.
Yeah, there.
Can you repeat her question?
Yeah. Oh, the question is, what has happened to Shambhala? Well, in the last few years, several extremely unfortunate things that brought to light extremely unfortunate things from 10 and 20 and 30 years previously. The Unitarian Universalist space is uniquely a place to be candid, and I'll be candid with you. I think at the moment they have their tail between their legs. And I'm really hoping that the extremely unfortunate events of the last, since their inception, that have just come to light. It's not that the bad things happened in the 5 years ago. Good things happened starting 5 years ago, and that is to say that they identified their spiritual leader as a rapist, as an out-of-control rapist. And they've been dealing with that. And so they've got this issue of having a supreme being who grabs women's butts whenever possible and gets drunk. And it's like, and I've had frank conversations. I'm like, well, what can you do? He's a supreme being. It's like, people, but they did do something. Okay, they moved the supreme being off to a monastery in Cape Breton, and there's now a deputy supreme being here, which is a start, and they're talking about these issues. All right, but oh God. Anyway, where was I?
They also had a difficulty before that in terms of.
That's right. They had another, not the supreme being, but the deputy supreme being, who was HIV positive and had sex with most of the parishioners and infected many of the parishioners. Okay? That's unbecoming behavior of a supreme being, in my opinion. Sorry. I didn't mean to go on a rant here. Okay.
Maybe designating people supreme beings.
Starting in the mid-2000s, a thing happened a few years before that. Again, an unfortunate event which precipitated the Shar Shalom becoming much more open-minded about everything, including LGBT folk. And they've declared themselves to be LGBT friendly. They do at the Shar Shalom. We have two synagogues in Halifax. Beth is the other one, both on Oxford Street. So they now have, they've always had queer members, of course, every church does, but now they're out of the closet. They have this fantastic lesbian cantor, someone who, like you, can give people I don't want to compare, but she's a little bit better. She gives people the next lines in English and Hebrew in the break between lines. So it'll be sung line, next line in English and Hebrew, sung line, next line in English and Hebrew. She's quite talented. Openly lesbian. She got married. They agreed to do gay marriages a while ago. Spirit Place, this big building that you see here, was an initiative by St. John's United in 2010, and because their building was crumbling. All the churches built in Halifax right around 1920 were built with interior brick. All of them, they're built with interior brick, and so the churches will just disintegrate. Every church that you've seen, every old church in Halifax that you've seen that is in use has been painted or spackled or to keep the water off the brick, because the bricks will disintegrate. They didn't do that at St. John's United. The building collapsed on itself, and they said, "Oh, we'll build this really nice building here." That didn't work out. It's a sad story. I can tell you more about it. And believe it or not, for a while, for a year, we had a queer mosque called the Halifax Unity Mosque, which is part of a network of similar queer mosques in Halifax, run by a professor out of St. Mary's. And that's it. I have one kind of announcement, and that's this thing. This is a new story. This book is new. The book launch was last week. I'll have the book out at tea afterwards. In 1873, this huge ship that was the largest marine disaster before the Titanic, called the SS Atlantic, went down to Prospect, not far from where your cottage was. Hundreds of people died, and sailors, passengers and sailors both. And they did autopsies, of course, on everyone that they could. And one of the sailors, they did the autopsy on and found out she had a vagina. It was a woman pretending to be a sailor, pretending to be a man. No, there was very little information on it, but the author here, Lynette, whose like great-great-great-great-grandfathers were among the people in Prospect who helped pull people out of this wreck in 1873, descendant of, was entranced by this story. She's a author and artist, and she did a couple years of research and a couple years of writing, and then she drew this graphic novel. It's extremely touching. I'll leave it out there. Some of it's all the facts that she could dig up, and then she imagined the spaces in between. It's quite a story. So I'll have that out. It's available at Venus NV in Cape and Caldwell and so on and so on. So you can see there's been very, very many, a lot of birds of a feather spiritual groups that met for safety and away from the intolerant main church groups of Christians and others. But there's never been a separate Unitarian Universalist group. And why is that? Why is that? There's never been a separate gay Unitarian Universalist group.
No need to.
Exactly. There's never been a need to. There's never been a need to. So here we are, celebrating 50 years of friendship and growing together. L'chaim. Thank you. And we can do questions and discussions over cake. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dan, for that incredible journey through the history of the Q community of Halifax. And thank you for volunteering to stay after for questions and so on. And we'll work out how to do that with the Zoom. Now let us recognize our support of the LGBTQ+ community by singing 1014, which is now called Answering the Call of Love. We originally learned it as Standing on the Side of Love, which is what my t-shirt says and all our signs, but answering the call is much more inclusive. So please stand as you are willing or able, but we can all answer.
There you go.
B flat.
E flat, yeah. There you go. The promise of the Spirit, faith, hope, and love abide, and every soul is blessed and made whole. The truth in our hearts is our guide. We are
now Pam Griffin-Hody, President of our board, will lead our offering and also give us the announcements for the next week.
Okay, I really like this system where I don't have to climb up on a stool. It's funny, I have this, if you noticed that the slide that talked about that board meeting in 1972, and it said carried 5 for, 2 against. I actually have it on good authority that the 2 who voted against it were only voting against the free part. I wanted to say that before my wee blurb about the offering. Community is made possible by the offering of our individual skills, commitments, and gifts. The truth is that we need each other and money to survive, and yet nobody's worth and dignity is in any way measured by the amount of money that they have or don't have to give. So during the offering, we invite you to offer what you can, if you can, to support this sanctuary of progressive spirituality. If you don't carry cash, you can donate by e-transfer to treasurer@uuch.ca. Many of us pledge monthly. Our 2023 pledge drive will be coming up shortly. And this week, the extra money collected will go towards the operation of our church. Thank you. Music. Our announcements go out periodically on UU Info. If you would like to get our announcements, please, and you don't, please leave your email address in the book outside. I have 2 announcements today. The first is a reminder that Wednesday is the deadline for the newsletter for November. Please send stuff directly to ETA electronically. There's ETA, our Stallard newsletter editor. Next Sunday is our semi-annual general meeting where the most important topic is the 2023 budget and our visions for what we want to do and how we are going to fund what we want to do. Please come. It'll be directly after church. Molly Hurd, our secretary, noted that last year our SGM ended at something like 2:15. Please bring a sandwich. We'll have coffee and tea and cookies if someone remembers to pick them up. But yeah, I would bring something to eat. Yeah, that's it. Those are the 2 announcements. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Now I have selected words from the Buddhist theology for our benediction. Be ye lamps unto yourselves. Be your own confidence. Hold to the truth within yourselves as to the only lamp. And thank you to all who participated today, particularly Daniel and Jessica, and those who attended in person and on Zoom. We'll have coffee and cake in the other room, and then our question and answer. I think we'll have to do that back here with Dan so that the people on Zoom will be able to participate. And let us close by singing our Here Together closing song on the back of your order of service.
What is wrong with me? I've been starting in the wrong keys. There we go. Okay, if you want, stand. If you want, dance. If you want to, sit. We have spent time together, and these holy moments give us strength to go down a winding road until we meet again. Thank you. Let's do that again. We have spent time together, and these holy moments give us strength to go down the winding road until we meet again. And my prayer for you is a peace that's true until we meet again.
Thank you again. Go in peace.